and welcome to Pock and Rob. In today's video, my attention turns to someone who for over 50 years has been a highly successful chart artist, both singles and albums. I am of course talking about Sir Elton John. Now, as I say, Elton John's had a career that has lasted since the very late 60s, all the way through to his most recent album, which is called The Lockdown Sessions, which was released last year. Within that career, there have been some absolutely classic albums, and there has been some utter crud. I'm going to rank my top 15 Elton John albums, and there are a lot of albums that I could have considered. Indeed, this is a man who released an album called 21 at 33, which reflected the fact that there had been 21 albums, including greatest hits, released by the time he was 33. If you take just standard studio albums, then the aforementioned Lockdown Sessions was, I believe, classed as his 32nd studio album. Before I dive in, I just remind you to like the video, subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, and let's go in at number 15, and I have placed 1974's Caribou. If you've watched any of my videos before, then you'll know that I did my top 15 disappointments, and Caribou is included in that. I don't think it's a good album, but I think it's the best of the rest. It was either going to be this or Blue Moves, and ultimately the presence of Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, which is phenomenal, Bitch Is Back, which is really good, and Ticking, which is terrific song, really deep subject matter, is what elevated this just into 15th place. It's not a good album, but it does contain 2 or 3 really, really fine tracks, and that's what gets it in. At number 14, I have placed 1978's A Single Man. The title of the album reflects 2 things. One, it was his first album that was not produced by Gus Dudgeon in an incredibly long time. But also, he had stopped writing with Bernie Taupin. He was writing with a new songwriting partner called Gary Osborne. The results are mixed, but there's much to enjoy on A Single Man, not least Song for Guy, which was solely written by Elton John. But Part-Time Love is great. I really enjoy Big Dipper. Shine On Through is a really, really good song. And A Single Man, whilst it is maybe the starting point of a real creative and commercial slump for Elton John, is still a really enjoyable album. And Single Man, my number 14. At number 13, I have placed his big old reunion with Bernie Taupin, and it's Too Low for Zero. Again, not a great album. There's a fair bit that's forgettable on here, but what is unforgettable is I'm Still Standing. I guess that's why they call it the blues. Kiss the Bride, Cold as Christmas, and the title track Too Low for Zero. Album of 2 halves. 5 tracks are terrific, 5 are so-so. But it was a return of commercial and critical success for Elton John after that slump period between A Single Man and Too Low for Zero. Too Low for Zero, my number 13. At number 12, I have placed Tumbleweed Connection, the second album from 1970. This album for me doesn't contain anything approaching the high points of the other 3 albums I've already mentioned, but it is so much more consistent throughout. There's nothing bad or cringeworthy on Tumbleweed Connection. If there's a problem with Elton John albums, is they often contain a cringe or 3. And Tumbleweed Connection doesn't contain any cringy stuff, but it doesn't contain anything that I adore. It's a cohesive, thematic whole, and as a result, it just nudges above the previous 3 on this list. Tumbleweed Connection, it's fine, and it's fine throughout. Number 12. At number 11, I have placed my favourite Elton John album of the 80s. It is 1989's Sleeping with the Past. Now, this often doesn't get a lot of credit, but it contains Sacrifice, Healing Hands, which I think is a really underrated song, Durban Deep, Club at the End of the Street, Whispers. There's some really fine material on this album. I think it is better than Too Low for Zero. And it's his last really enjoyable album for a decade for me. It doesn't get the credit it deserves. And in some cases, it's a bit of a tribute to the songs he grew up with. And Billy Joel did that in 1983 with the Innocent Man album, and in my opinion did it better. But Sleeping with the Past, there is much to really like on this album. My number 11. Into the top 10, and I have placed what has sometimes been cited as his last album. Now, I mentioned Lockdown Sessions. That was a load of collaborations built over a period of time and all thrown together on a mess of a collection. And Regimental Sergeant Zippo was recorded in 1967-68. His last proper album is this, Wonderful Crazy Night. And I think this is a good album for Elton John to cease his recording career on. There's some great tracks on here like Tambourine, and the title track I think is one of his very best ever songs. Clawhammer's really good. Blue Wonderful's great. It's a good album from a man in his 60s. Wonderful Crazy Night is at number 10. And at number 9, I have placed one of 3 albums that Elton released in the 2000s. All 3 of which are really good. This is the lowest place of them, so spoilers, I like the other 2 as well. It's Peachtree Road. Peachtree Road was his least successful chart album for decades, but is really good. This is almost the sister album to one that I will be mentioning a lot later in terms of great material, chart duffer. On this, we've got All That I'm Allowed, They Call Her the Cat, Porch Swing in Tupelo, which I think is probably the best song on it. And it's a bit of a return as well, in a way, to some of the Americana that he'd done on the aforementioned Tumbleweed Connection. Good album, Peachtree Road, and deserves a revisit. It's being released on vinyl very shortly with the extra tracks that came out on the reissue version, which includes Electricity and Merry Christmas Maggie Thatcher from the Billy Elliot musical. Peachtree Road, better album than its reputation deserves. Number 8, and I have placed 1973's Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. This kicks off with Daniel, which is one of his very best ever singles, and closes with High Flying Bird, which is a fantastic closing track to this album. But in between, we have got Have Mercy on the Criminal and Midnight Creeper, Texan Love Song, which is just daft but really, really enjoyable, Blues for Baby and Me, Elderberry Wine. The weakest track on here is, for me, the one that overshadows the album, and it's Crocodile Rock. Huge hit, but just a tiny bit cringeworthy these days. Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player is my number 8. At number 7, I have placed the first Elton John album that I purchased contemporaneously, i.e. when it came out. And that is Songs from the West Coast from 2001. This is often cited as Elton John's return to form after a pretty shonky 1990s. I tend to agree. I don't like almost anything he did in the 90s, with the exception of the songs from The Lion King. The album kicks off with Emperor's New Clothes, which I really, really like, although I've seen some reviews that kind of say it's a clunker. I disagree. Likewise, American Triangle, which I think is one of his very, very best songs. But again, people think he's really clunky. I love the melody in that and the heartfelt delivery of the lyrics. But we've also have I Want Love, Original Sin, both of which were good singles. And then This Train Don't Stop There Anymore at the end of the record. Songs from the West Coast, my number 7. And number 6 from 1972, Honky Chateau. It's taken me a long time to appreciate this album. I always thought this was a bit of a mid-range album, but the more I've listened to it, the more I've realised that Honky Chateau is really good. Now, the reason I don't think I held it in very high esteem was that Honky Cat, I found a bit of a tiresome track on his greatest hits, and I'm not that fond of Rocket Man. But other than those 2 tracks, we've got things like Susie and Mellow, Hercules, and one of his very, very best ever songs, Mona Lisas and Mad Hatters. That alone grants the album an elevated status to my number 6. Honky Chateau. Into my top 5, and at number 5 I have placed his self-titled album from 1970, Elton John. This isn't his debut, but to all intents and purposes, as far as the world was concerned, it pretty much is. So yes, this contains and kicks off with Your Song, the song that got him noticed. But the rest of the music isn't too shabby. First episode at Hienton, The King Must Die, Cage, Take Me to the Pilot, and The Greatest Discovery, which is fantastic. But the very best thing on here, I think, is Border Song. My number 5, Elton John from 1970. At number 4, I have placed the third album released in the 2000s from Elton John, and comfortably I think his best. Captain and the Kid. A sequel. This is a sequel to Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, and it's a very worthy follow-up. So this follows the period from the end of the Captain Fantastic album all the way through to the, at the time, present day. Kicks off with Postcards from Richard Nixon. Great songs like Just Like Noah's Ark and I Wouldn't Have You Any Other Way, New York City, Tinderbox. And then it brings back that melody from Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy in Captain and the Kid. I believe it was written in the order that it's on the album, exactly like Captain Fantastic was. And it's a very clever follow-up. It's his best late period album for me by some distance, because it revisits the best stuff of his glory years. Captain and the Kid. If you haven't heard this one, it's worth checking out. My number 4. At number 3, I have placed the album that most people would probably expect at number 1, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. It's a double album, and I have done a video condensing it to a single, where I think it would have been probably number 1 on this list, because I think there's a little bit too much filler on this record. However, what can you say about an album that contains Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding, Candle in the Wind, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting, Harmony, Ballad of Danny Bailey. It's just a really good album, actually. I think it would be better as a single, as I've said before, but it's still great stuff. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, his second album from 1973, is at number 3. At number 2, I have placed the original Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. From 1975, a concept album all about the friendship and the partnership between Elton and Bernie Taupin. This is, for me, probably a perfect album. I don't think there's a bad song on it. I don't think there's a song out of place. Kicks off with the title track, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, which is just sublime. And concludes with We All Fall in Love Sometimes, Curtains, like kind of fused together. But on the way, we've got Bitter Fingers and Writing and Someone Saved My Life Tonight, which was not a massively successful single, but is still a great song. Captain Fantastic, famously, after they'd released it, they played the entire album live, which I think might be the only time he's ever done that in his career. From the Edge of the World to Your Town, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy is a concept album that truly works. My number 2. And at number 1, from 1971, Madman Across the Water. This is the album that really turned me on to Elton John, all because of Tiny Dancer, which to this day is probably still my favourite Elton John track. This is a 9-track album. It kicks off with Leave On, it's followed by the aforementioned Tiny Dancer, Razorface, and then the title track Madman Across the Water. We then turn over on side 2 to get probably the weakest track on the album, which is Indian Sunset. Now, that's interesting because Indian Sunset is kind of a number 1 single. There was a collaboration or a remix thing that was done with Tupac, and Indian Sunset was used and it got to number 1. So it's kind of got a number 1 single on it. That's followed on by Holiday Inn, which he played live when I saw him and was phenomenal. Rotten Peaches, All the Nasties, and then the really beautiful piano ballad track at the end, Goodbye. This has just been re-released as a just over 50th anniversary edition as a 4-disc vinyl, which I would actually quite like to own, because I think Madman Across the Water is his very best album, and it's comfortably my number one. So that concludes my top 15 Elton John albums. I have to admit, there are Elton John albums I have never heard, and I've got no real desire to. So things like 21 at 33 and The Fox and The One, and definitely no intention of hearing Leather Jackets or The Big Picture. Let me know in the comments if there's a really great Elton John album that I haven't mentioned that perhaps I should go back and listen to. I'll just remind you to like, subscribe and hit the bell. But until next time, thanks for watching.